Omega Girl falls asleep on Alpha King's shoulder and wakes up in his bed. Lanterns flickered along the stone pathways, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance to a rhythm only the darkness knew. In the heart of the kingdom, the Alpha King's fortress rose like a dark sentinel, its walls steeped in legend and whispers of power. No one dared approach uninvited, and even the bravest courtiers tread lightly in his presence. Yet tonight, the grand hall buzzed with a rare excitement. The royal gala had drawn nobles from distant lands, all eager to glimpse the man whose reputation was as sharp as the blade he wore at his side. The Alpha King was a figure of awe and fear, a ruler who inspired loyalty and terror in equal measure. No one truly knew the man behind the crown. He was rumored to be unyielding, cold, and merciless, but beneath the iron exterior, some said there was a heart both scarred and capable of great depth. Among the crowd moved a young woman who seemed almost out of place. She was quiet, with eyes that held a curious intelligence and a warmth that drew attention even in her subtle way. Her name was Seraphine, though few knew it yet. An omega of unusual gifts, she could sense emotions that others kept hidden, though she had never spoken of this power. She walked carefully through the crowd, unnoticed by most, observing, listening, learning. Tonight, she had been invited by a minor noble in hopes of her company, lending a gentle charm to the evening. As Seraphine lingered near the edge of the hall, her attention was drawn to the throne where the Alpha King himself sat. He was taller than she had imagined, his posture rigid, commanding, yet his eyes dark and piercing, held an almost imperceptible shadow of weariness. The room seemed to shrink around him. Conversations quieted when he glanced their way, and even the most confident courtiers bowed slightly in respect or fear. It was in that moment that Seraphine felt an inexplicable pull. It was not attraction alone. It was something deeper, a resonance that tickled her senses and set her heart to a rhythm she had not known. Her steps moved almost of their own accord, drawing her closer to the throne, closer to the man whose presence seemed to hold both danger and warmth. The king noticed her as she approached. For the first time that night, his eyes lingered on someone without suspicion or judgment. There was a stillness in the way he regarded her, a curiosity that made the air between them tense and electric. Seraphine's breath caught, and she realized she had stopped just short of the dais. The room seemed to blur around her, every noise fading until all that remained was the hum of the Alpha King's presence. "Do you wish to speak?" His voice was deep, steady, and carried the weight of command. Seraphine's lips parted, but no words came immediately. Her mind raced, torn between fear and an urge she could not name. Finally, she bowed slightly, her voice soft but clear. I did not mean to intrude, Your Majesty. I only wished to," she faltered, unsure of how to finish. The king's gaze softened just enough to unsettle him in his own eyes. "Stay," he said simply. "You are not intruding." That single word, ordinary to others, was extraordinary to her. There was no pretense, no test, it was permission, and it felt like a rare gift. Seraphine's shoulders relaxed, though her heart still hammered against her chest. She took a tentative step closer, and the king did not move to stop her. The gala went on around them, the music swelling and fading in waves, but for a brief time, Seraphine and the king existed in a pocket of silence. She noticed the subtle lines of fatigue around his eyes, the faintest tension in his jaw, and the careful way he held himself, always aware, always measured. And yet, when their eyes met, she sensed a vulnerability he did not share with the world. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes, and Seraphine found herself seated beside him at a quiet corner of the hall, away from the crowd. She had never dared to approach royalty in this manner, yet here she was, drawn by a curiosity she could not resist. The king did not speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight and thought, cutting through the noise of the gala with their clarity. "You are unlike the others," he said quietly, his gaze holding hers. Most come with expectations, with fear or desire. You do not. Seraphine tilted her head, unsure if he meant it as a compliment or an observation. I have no wish to be anything but myself, she said softly. I cannot pretend in ways that matter. The king's eyes flickered, a hint of amusement breaking through the stoicism. Few can speak with such honesty and remain unscathed. As the night grew later, the hall began to empty. Servants moved through the corridors, extinguishing lanterns and sweeping up remnants of the evening. The air grew cooler, scented with the night and distant rain. Seraphine felt her eyelids grow heavy, exhaustion weaving through her like a gentle lullaby. She had been on her feet for hours, and the tension of the evening, though thrilling, had taken its toll. Without realizing it, she leaned slightly toward the king, seeking a moment of reprieve. Her head found his shoulder, a movement so small, so instinctive that she did not think it could be noticed. Yet the king felt it. Every muscle in his body tensed, a subtle, involuntary reaction to her closeness. He did not move her away, nor did he speak. He simply held still, feeling the weight of her presence and the soft warmth that radiated against his arm. For a long moment, neither of them breathed aloud. The world outside the hall, the gossip, the power struggles, the shadows of old curses, faded into insignificance. All that remained was this fleeting connection, fragile yet profound, like the quiet pause before a storm. Seraphine's breathing slowed and she slipped into sleep, the rhythm of the king's heartbeat beneath her a strange comfort. He stared down at her, a storm of conflicting emotions swirling in his chest: duty, desire, fear, and something deeper he had not acknowledged in years. The closeness stirred something he had long kept buried, a longing for trust and connection that had been denied to him for too long. He wanted to speak, to move, to test the boundaries of this unexpected intimacy, yet he remained still, knowing that any action might shatter the delicate moment. The gala had ended, the hall was empty, and they were alone in a castle that often felt colder than stone and shadow. And in that silence, a fragile bond formed, one neither of them fully understood yet, but both could sense its significance. The night drew on, and the first hints of dawn painted the high windows with pale light. Seraphine stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and for a brief instant she was uncertain where she was. The warmth of the room, the faint scent of incense and old stone made no sense. She was not in the hall anymore. Her head rested on a soft pillow, the silk of sheets beneath her unfamiliar against her skin. Her eyes widened as she turned her head slightly, and saw the Alpha King, standing near the window, watching her with an expression that was unreadable, intense, and raw. The moment froze her in place. How did I get here?" she whispered, voice trembling between fear and awe. The king's gaze did not waver. "You fell asleep on my shoulder," he said quietly, "and when you did, I could not let you wake alone." Seraphine's heart skipped. The implications were enormous. This was his private bedchamber, a sanctum few had ever seen. She wanted to rise, to step back, but her body felt rooted, caught between alarm and a strange, compelling trust. He approached slowly, every movement measured, yet there was no threat in him, only an unspoken question. "You are safe," he said softly, the words both a reassurance and a confession of the care he felt for her. "Do not fear." The air seemed to thicken with tension, fragile and electric. Neither spoke for a long time, each lost in the thought of what this night might mean, each aware that the smallest gesture could change everything. Seraphine's mind raced, wondering if her life had irrevocably shifted in a single night. And the king, for the first time in decades, considered the possibility that power alone was not enough, that the presence of another soul, quiet and unafraid, could awaken a part of him long dormant. And then, as if the world itself held its breath, Seraphine realized that this night, this castle, this man, everything she had known before was now a prelude to something far greater, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than she could imagine. A shadow passed across the window, unseen but felt, like a warning from the world beyond the castle walls. The king's eyes flicked to it, a frown crossing his face, and Seraphine felt a shiver of unease. Something stirred in the night, a force old, restless, and not entirely human. She would not know what it was yet, but she would soon. And with that, the first day of their intertwined fates ended, leaving both of them on the brink of a world they could not yet see, bound together by a moment that neither could forget. The castle was quieter than usual the morning after the gala. Light filtered through the tall windows of the Alpha King's private chambers, casting long golden beams over the stone floor. Seraphine sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. The events of the night weighed heavily on her, how she had fallen asleep on his shoulder and now awoken in his private room. She felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. Every instinct told her to flee, but every part of her also whispered that she could not yet. The Alpha King stood near the window, watching the courtyard below, his back straight and proud as always. Yet his posture seemed less rigid than before, almost hesitant, as if the weight of something invisible pressed upon him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, carrying the same calm authority as before, but softer. "You slept well?" he asked. There was no mockery, no interrogation, just a quiet concern that made Seraphine's chest tighten. I think so," she said, her voice uncertain. "It's just, I don't understand how I ended up here." He turned to her, and for a moment the usual wall of command melted. "I could not let you wake alone," he said simply. "It was safer." Seraphine studied him, noticing the faint shadow under his eyes and the way his hands flexed at his sides. She realized with a sudden sharp clarity that even a ruler as feared as he could feel doubt, fear, and care. It startled her, and yet it drew her closer. "Safer," she repeated softly. "From what?" He paused, hesitating as if weighing what to reveal. Finally he said, "The world is not kind to those who are alone here. You are not like the others, and that draws attention." Her brow furrowed. "Attention." He nodded, the movement subtle but deliberate. "There are forces in this kingdom older than any crown. Shadows that watch, curses that linger, and some who would use you without care. I do not trust most people with their intentions, but you, I feel compelled to protect." Seraphine's heart quickened. She had never known a man to speak so openly of protection, of concern without expectation. Her own abilities, her sense for hidden emotions, told her that this was true. He was not speaking from politeness or from a game of power. There was sincerity in him, buried deep but unmistakable. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "I am just me. I have nothing to offer a king." His gaze softened, and for a moment the intimidating Alpha King was replaced by a man who bore the weight of isolation and regret. "That is precisely why," he said. "You see the truth of things. You are not blinded by ambition or fear. You feel more than most. That is why your presence matters." Seraphine felt a strange warmth in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with honesty, not with the gravity of truth. And yet, beneath the warmth, a thread of unease tugged at her, because she knew that being seen by him came with danger. The castle corridors were long and silent when they left the chamber. Servants avoided their path, whispers falling into silence as the king walked. Seraphine stayed close, drawn not only by curiosity but by an unspoken understanding that the world outside the room was different now. She was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. They walked into the garden, where the mist clung to every flower and tree like delicate lace. The garden was quiet, except for the faint chirping of early birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Here, the king moved with a different ease, less like a ruler and more like someone who had learned to navigate the shadows of his own life. "You should rest more," he said, glancing at her. "Your energy is not only your own, it is tied to things you may not yet understand." "What do you mean?" she asked. She felt her pulse quicken. His words hinted at something beyond ordinary knowledge, something tied to magic, to curses, to forces older than the kingdom itself. He looked away, focusing on the horizon, as if considering how much to reveal. "There are old powers here," he said finally. "They watch, they test, and sometimes they punish. You awaken something in them simply by being." Seraphine's eyes widened. "Awaken something? I don't understand." "Not yet," he said, turning to meet her gaze again. "But you will. And when that moment comes, you must be ready. Your presence can change what has been set in motion for centuries." A chill ran down her spine, but it was not fear alone. It was anticipation, curiosity, and a sense of destiny she had never felt before. She realized that she had been drawn to him not only by admiration but by something deeper, something older, something that bound her to the kingdom in ways she could not yet name. The king studied her carefully, as if reading her thoughts. "I will teach you," he said. "Not only how to survive here, but how to understand the forces that shape this land. You have a gift, whether you know it or not, and it cannot be ignored." Seraphine swallowed, feeling both intimidated and honored. "Teach me," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said, "but know this, learning will not be easy. There are truths that are harsh, sacrifices that will be demanded, and choices that will test who you are. And yet you will not face them alone." She nodded, though her mind raced. She had always known her life was ordinary, simple, and quiet. But now, with the Alpha King's words and the weight of his presence, she felt as though a door had opened, one leading into a world she had only glimpsed in dreams. The garden seemed to grow darker as the morning passed, clouds gathering to block the sun. The mist thickened, curling around the hedges and statues as if alive. Seraphine shivered, sensing a movement she could not see, a subtle shift in the air, a whisper of danger. Her instincts, honed by years of quiet observation, told her that the king's warning was not idle talk. The king's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, guiding her through the mist. It was a touch that spoke of authority, of care, and of a connection neither of them fully understood yet. Seraphine felt her heart beat faster, but she did not pull away. She trusted him, even as the warning in her mind grew louder. Suddenly a figure emerged from the mist, a shadowy presence, cloaked and indistinct. Seraphine stiffened, sensing an unnatural aura that chilled her to the bone. The king's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening instantly. "Who goes there?" he demanded, his voice low and commanding. The figure did not speak, only moved closer, gliding rather than walking, its form flickering like smoke in the air. Seraphine felt a twinge of fear, but it was overlaid with fascination. There was something about the presence that spoke of power, of ancient knowledge, and of judgment. The king stepped in front of her, placing himself between the shadow and Seraphine. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his muscles, a readiness to strike if necessary. "You do not belong here," he said firmly. "Leave before I decide otherwise." The shadow wavered, and then, as if satisfied with his response, it retreated into the mist, leaving only a lingering coldness in its wake. Seraphine shivered again, more from the feeling of unseen eyes than from the chill. What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Old magic," the king said simply. "A warning, you are being watched, tested. The forces that linger in this land do not take kindly to intruders or to those who are unprepared." Seraphine looked at him, realization dawning. "You mean me? I'm being tested." He met her gaze steadily. "Yes, and how you respond will shape not only your fate but the fate of this kingdom." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She had felt a pull toward him, toward the castle, toward something she could not explain, and now she understood that it was not chance. She was part of a greater plan, and her choices mattered in ways she had never imagined. The king turned, leading her back toward the castle. "You must rest, prepare, and learn," he said. "There are truths that will come slowly, and powers that must be understood before they are used. Tonight will be only the beginning." Seraphine nodded, though her mind was a whirl of questions and emotions. She realized that the moment on his shoulder had been more than a coincidence. It had been the spark that lit a fire neither of them could ignore. And now, with the shadow's warning and the weight of destiny pressing down, she understood that her life had irrevocably changed. As they entered the castle, the mist curling back into the night, Seraphine stole a glance at the king. He was still the Alpha King, the ruler feared by many, but now she saw something else, someone capable of trust, of care, and of connection. And for the first time, she wondered if even he could be changed. The castle doors closed behind them, muffling the whispers of the night. But outside, in the darkness, the shadow lingered, watching, waiting, and reminding them both that the forces at play were older and more dangerous than they could yet comprehend. The sun had set, leaving the castle bathed in the cold silver light of the moon. The gardens were quiet, shrouded in mist that slithered between the statues and hedges like living creatures. Seraphine walked beside the Alpha King, her thoughts heavy with the events of the morning. The shadow that had appeared in the garden still lingered in her mind, a reminder that the kingdom was not merely stone and stone walls. It was alive with forces she barely understood. "You have questions," the king said, his voice calm but edged with certainty. "I do," she admitted, her eyes on the path ahead. "Why me? Why am I here? Why did the shadow appear?" He paused, considering how much to reveal. "You are here because fate has chosen you. You possess a gift, one that most cannot understand. The shadow was a warning, a test of your readiness, and you are part of a story older than this castle, older than the crown itself." Seraphine's steps faltered. "A story? What do you mean?" He glanced at her, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of his face. "This kingdom is bound by old magic. It watches, it judges, it rewards or punishes those who live within it. You have awakened something in me that the magic has long awaited. That is why the shadow appeared. It recognized your presence, your potential, and it tested both of us." She shivered, not entirely from the cold. "Potential for what?" "To survive," he said, "to change the balance that has existed for centuries, and to endure what is coming." Seraphine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She had always thought her life would be ordinary, predictable. But now, the threads of her existence were tangled with forces she could barely comprehend, and with the king, whose presence stirred emotions she did not yet understand. The king led her to a secluded chamber, one she had never seen before. Candles lined the walls, their flames dancing and reflecting off polished stone. In the center lay an assortment of ancient texts, scrolls, and artifacts, some glowing faintly as if alive. The air was heavy with knowledge and power. "You must learn," he said, gesturing to the artifacts. "Understanding these things will be the only way to navigate the dangers ahead. There are curses, prophecies, and shadows that linger, waiting for mistakes, waiting for weakness. You cannot face them unprepared." Seraphine stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of a glowing crystal. A warmth spread from it to her hand, and images flashed in her mind, shapes and figures, ancient battles, whispers of voices she could not understand. She gasped, pulling back, but the king's presence was steady and grounding. "You feel it," he said, his voice calm. "That is your gift. You can sense power even when it is hidden. You can feel what others cannot, but it is dangerous if uncontrolled. You must learn to focus, to command your own senses before the forces here take control of you." "I don't know if I can," she whispered. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest like stone. "You can," he said firmly. "I will guide you, but you must also trust yourself. Strength comes from courage, not from fear, and you have courage whether you know it yet or not." For hours they worked in silence, moving through exercises that tested her focus and perception. He guided her hands over ancient symbols, showed her how to sense the flow of energy, how to feel the presence of magic in objects and in people. Seraphine's head spun at first, but gradually she began to grasp the rhythms, the subtle currents that pulsed through the castle. As the night deepened, the castle seemed to breathe around them. Shadows twisted in the corners, and distant sounds echoed like whispers of long-forgotten spirits. Seraphine realized that the world was alive with hidden motion, and that even the walls themselves held memories of past rulers, past battles, past loves and betrayals. At one point, she paused, overwhelmed. "It's too much," she said. "I don't know if I can manage all of this." The king came closer, his presence steady and commanding. "You are not alone," he said quietly. "You are never alone. You have strength and you have guidance. The rest will come with time." Seraphine looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both fear and something else, a strange longing, a recognition that they were bound together by more than circumstance. She felt the pull of his gaze, the intensity of it, and for a moment the world outside the chamber disappeared. There was only him, and the silent understanding that whatever was coming would change both of them. Hours passed, and exhaustion finally claimed her. She leaned back against the stone wall, her head resting lightly on the table as she closed her eyes. The king remained nearby, watching, alert to every shift in the shadows, every flicker of the candlelight. She drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by glimpses of the shadow that had appeared before, of whispers in the mist, and of eyes that watched her from the darkness. In her dreams, the king was both protector and companion, guiding her through corridors she had never seen, showing her glimpses of the past and warnings of the future. She saw images of battles fought by unseen hands, of ancient curses laid upon the land, and of a figure who seemed familiar yet terrifying, moving through time and shadow. She awoke with a start, the candlelight flickering across the walls. The king was still there, seated near the doorway, watching her with a careful intensity. "The visions come with your gift," he said. "They are warnings, lessons, and sometimes temptations. You must learn to interpret them, or they will control you." Seraphine nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. She realized that the path ahead would not be simple, nor safe. Every choice she made would carry consequences, not only for her but for the kingdom, and for the king who had already become inseparable from her fate. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the corridor, a low, unnatural sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. The candles flickered violently, shadows stretching and twisting across the walls. Seraphine's heart raced. The king's expression hardened instantly. "They are here," he said, moving to stand beside her. "The forces that watch this castle have noticed your presence more fully. We must act." He led her quickly through secret corridors she had not known existed, passages lined with ancient carvings that seemed to move and shift as they passed. The castle was no longer just stone and shadow. It was a living entity, aware of their movements, aware of the bond forming between them. They reached a small chamber at the heart of the castle, one that radiated warmth and light unlike any other room they had seen. In the center lay a pedestal with a crystal orb glowing softly with a silver-blue light. The king gestured to it. "This is your next lesson," he said. "You must learn to channel your gift here. The orb will respond to your energy, and through it, you will gain insight into the forces at work in this kingdom." Seraphine approached cautiously, laying her hands on the orb. A wave of energy surged through her, and images flashed in her mind. Visions of the castle, of the gardens, of hidden corridors and chambers she had not yet discovered. She felt the presence of the shadow again, distant but undeniable, moving and waiting. The king's voice was steady in her mind. "Focus. Do not let fear guide you. Let your instincts and your heart lead the way." She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath, letting her gift flow through her. The orb pulsed, responding to her energy, revealing patterns and paths through the castle, warnings of danger and glimpses of hidden truths. For the first time, she felt the weight of her potential and the responsibility that came with it. When she opened her eyes, the king was watching her, his expression unreadable but intense. "You have begun," he said quietly, But this is only the start. The shadow you encountered will return stronger, and it will test both of us. And the forces that linger in this kingdom, they will not rest until they have claimed what they seek. Seraphine swallowed hard, the gravity of his words sinking in. What do they seek? She asked, her voice trembling. Your courage, he said, your heart, and your bond with me. That is what they will try to break. She felt a shiver of fear and anticipation. She understood now that her presence in the castle was no accident, that her connection to the king was not merely happenstance. Their fates were entwined, and the shadows that moved unseen would do everything to unravel them. As they left the chamber, moving back into the corridors of the castle, Seraphine felt a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that the coming nights would test her in ways she could not yet imagine, and that every lesson, every challenge would push her to her limits. Yet alongside that fear, there was a spark of trust, a belief that she and the king together could face whatever darkness awaited them. The castle doors closed behind them, the corridors stretching into darkness and light, past and future mingling in the shadows. Seraphine and the king walked side by side, two figures bound by destiny, by power, and by a connection that neither fully understood but that both could feel. The night was heavy, draped in mist that clung to the castle like a living shroud. Seraphine stood at the edge of the highest tower, her gaze fixed on the gardens below. The moonlight bathed everything in silver, and yet, beneath its calm, she could feel the tension thrumming in the air, the anticipation of forces waiting to strike. The castle itself seemed alive, its walls pulsing faintly with energy as though aware that a decisive moment was approaching. The Alpha King joined her silently, his presence steady and commanding. He did not speak at first, simply observing the night, listening to the whisper of the wind, feeling the subtle shift of energy that marked the approach of unseen threats. Seraphine could sense the weight he carried, the responsibility not just for the kingdom but for her, for the bond they shared, and for the destiny now entwined with theirs. They are close, he said finally, his voice low and certain. The shadows, the forces that have lingered in the edges of this castle, they have sensed your growth, your power. They will come tonight, testing not just your gift but the bond between us. Seraphine's fingers tightened around the railing, the cold metal grounding her. I'm ready, she said, though her heart raced. She was not entirely sure if she meant it, but she knew she could not turn away. She had learned to trust her instincts, to feel the energy that flowed through the castle, and to respond. She would face this, whatever it was, not as a victim but as someone capable of change. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, a subtle anchor amidst the rising storm of anticipation. Good, he said, but remember, strength alone is not enough. Trust, courage, and clarity will guide you. No sooner had he spoken than the mist thickened, twisting and coiling as if alive. Shadows moved within it, darker and more distinct than anything Seraphine had seen before. They slithered along the walls, creeping closer with silent menace. She could feel their energy, probing, testing, waiting for a weakness. Focus on the crystal, the king instructed, guiding her toward the pedestal where she had first learned to channel her gift. Let it amplify your senses. Do not be afraid. Seraphine approached the glowing orb cautiously, placing her hands upon it. Immediately, energy surged through her, a current that sharpened her mind and heightened her perception. The shadows were still there, swirling like smoke, but now she could sense their rhythm, their pulse, their intent. They were testing her, but she would not falter. The king stood beside her, calm and unwavering. You are not alone, he said. Feel my presence. Trust our connection. She closed her eyes, focusing on the bond between them, letting it guide her through the fear and chaos. The shadows recoiled slightly, surprised by the strength of the connection, by the unexpected force of unity. Seraphine felt a surge of confidence. She was not powerless. She could influence the energy around her, shape it, and stand against the darkness. One shadow lunged, forming into a humanoid shape with eyes like smoldering coals. Seraphine's instinct screamed, but she let the crystal guide her. Light flowed through her hands, weaving into patterns that pushed back the shadow, forcing it to retreat. The king moved with her, a partner in rhythm, his own energy merging with hers to form a shield against the encroaching darkness. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, almost a whisper amidst the chaos. "And you are not alone. Together we can overcome this." The shadow hissed, recoiling, and then multiplied, dividing into smaller forms that attacked from all directions. Seraphine felt her heart race, her breath coming in quick bursts, but she did not falter. She channeled the crystal's energy, shaping barriers, redirecting currents, and using her gift to sense the movements of the shadows before they struck. The king moved like a force of nature, his presence commanding the energy around him. Together, they formed a perfect balance, her intuition and his strength, her sensitivity and his command. The shadows faltered under their combined force, unable to penetrate the unity between them. For a moment, it seemed as though the darkness might overwhelm them. Seraphine's energy wavered, fatigue threatening to break her focus. But the king's hand found hers and the connection surged through her, steadying her, anchoring her resolve. "You can do this," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "Do not doubt yourself. Do not doubt us." A single surge of energy from the crystal, guided by Seraphine's intuition and amplified by their bond, pushed back the shadows in a wave of light. The dark forms shrieked, dissolving into mist that retreated to the edges of the castle. Silence fell once more, heavy and tense, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Seraphine collapsed onto the pedestal, exhausted, yet a sense of triumph coursed through her veins. The shadows had been held at bay, if only for the moment, and she had discovered the depth of her own power and the power of their bond. The king knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said. "Not because you fought them, but because you trusted yourself and trusted us. That is what matters. That is what will carry us forward." Seraphine looked up at him, her chest heaving, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper, something she had never felt before. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly. "Fear is natural," he said, "but courage is what defines us. And you have courage beyond measure." The moonlight glinted off his face, illuminating the softer lines beneath the regal mask of the Alpha King. In that moment, Seraphine saw not just the ruler but the man who had chosen to trust her, to stand beside her, and to share this burden. She realized that the connection between them was no longer just necessity. It had become something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. As the first light of dawn began to touch the towers, Seraphine and the king descended to the castle's courtyard. The mist had lifted, leaving a serene glow across the gardens. The shadows were gone for now, but their presence lingered in memory, a reminder that vigilance was never-ending. "You've changed," the king said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "Not just in power, but in understanding, in strength, and in purpose. You are ready for what comes next, whatever that may be." Seraphine nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had been tested not only by shadows but by fear, doubt, and her own limitations. And she had emerged stronger not just in skill but in understanding her own heart, her own power, and the bond she shared with the king. "Together," she said softly, "we can face anything." "Yes," he agreed, "together." For a long moment they stood in silence, the world around them calm and still, yet alive with potential. The castle, the kingdom, and the shadows had all tested them, but they had endured, united by trust, courage, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them. Then, from the far edges of the courtyard, a faint whisper drifted on the wind, a reminder that the world beyond the castle walls was still alive, still watching. Seraphine felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with calm. She was no longer afraid, for she knew that whatever challenges awaited, she would face them, not alone but with the king by her side. And in that moment, As the first rays of sun kissed the towers, she understood something profound. She had come to the castle uncertain, alone, and fearful, but she had discovered not only her own strength, but the depth of connection, trust, and courage. The castle, the shadows, and the destiny that had brought her here had all forged her into someone new, someone ready to face the darkness, to embrace her gift, and to stand beside the Alpha King as both ally and equal. The king's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, a simple yet profound gesture. Seraphine met his gaze, seeing the same mixture of respect, care, and unspoken emotion reflected back. In that shared moment, words were unnecessary. The battles fought, the shadows repelled, and the lessons learned had all led to this. A bond tempered by trial, strengthened by trust, and illuminated by courage. The castle, once a place of mystery and shadow, now felt like a home, a sanctuary where their power and connection could grow. Outside, the world waited, full of challenges and tests, but they were ready. Together, the Alpha King's voice broke the silence, low and steady. The night is over, but the story continues, and I am glad you are with me. Seraphine's lips curved into a small smile. And I am glad to be here, she said. As the sun rose fully over the towers, casting light on the castle and the gardens, the shadows were gone, but their memory remained, a reminder that vigilance, courage, and trust were eternal. And with that, Seraphine knew. She had found her place, her purpose, and the bond that would guide her through whatever destiny had in store.